This is the cross-distribution dev room. We're going to talk about all kinds of distribution things. If you don't want to talk about distribution things, probably leave now, or put your earplugs in. My name is Will Stevenson. I'm OpenSUSE booster. I've been a developer at OpenSUSE for nearly 7 years now, so I've seen quite a lot of changes in distribution. My colleagues here, Frederic Crozat, is also working on OpenSUSE engineering, and before that was, I think, the engineering lead at Mandriva. And Vincent Unz here is managing some change of his own. He's my colleague on the boosters team. He's been with us for 3 or 4 years? 4 years now? 5 years? I can't remember. Anyway. At OpenSUSE, we have rejected the paradigm of having one single grand strategy dictated by a benevolent dictator, or that's come up with by some amazingly cool product design team. Instead, we have a kind of a grand chaos of everyone pushing their own agendas, their own projects, newest things, and the things they'd like to have. And that means that we really do have that process of making a distribution, of bringing in all this kind of tangled spaghetti and straightening it out and somehow making it into a plate that looks nice to eat or to install on your machine. So let's talk a little bit about what we've been doing in OpenSUSE. And we've got 3 major examples of big changes in the distribution which have the potential to cause a lot of problems. So now going back 4 years ago to 2008, we had KD4 in OpenSUSE 11.0. We said from 11.0 to 11.2, new versions of KD were coming out, which were part of that change process. And then recently, in OpenSUSE 12.1, we've introduced systemd, and GNOME 3 has become the default GNOME installation on 12.1 as well. So all of those things change what is the nature of a distribution. To most users on the street, probably not the FOSDEM attendee, the desktop is the distribution. You can't really change anything more than that. So major changes there. Whereas systemd is how you go from a bunch of bytes on a disk somewhere to a running system. And that fundamentally changes the character distribution. So if we got this change process wrong, how many users would we have left? I hope some of you are still using OpenSUSE. Maybe? One guy, yes, okay, we haven't lost yet. Two. Okay, but it can't go wrong. No. Well, hopefully we've got a few insights into change management, which will show you how to keep that last guy. It's been said before, but the 5 Ps are perfect planning prevents piss poor performance, and that is never untrue, that axiom. Change will take a lot longer than you think. You have to know exactly what's going on upstream, and you have to really know the software yourself so you can track the impact. And at the same time, you have to be realistic. It takes a lot of work to get changes to a distribution of these sizes into the distribution. And the resources with which you will have to do those are always more limited than you think. Specifically, the amount of work in your init system or on your desktop requires specialist people. So make sure that the people that you have are as good as they possibly can be before you do this. Make sure you get your teams motivated and trained up. And also expect, as in any project management, it always takes longer than you think. There are always going to be bugs and setbacks. And now we have our data where we want it, and we're going to just change our presentation. F5. No?
That's the real price.
Now we have pictures.
No, that's what you were saying.
That's where I'm at.
Okay.
Next.
That's how
Well, as we'll explain, planning should be essential, but even when you try to do planning, it can go wrong, and in completely unexpected way. For instance, for System D, the idea was to do integration in phases, because this kind of low-level changes is a bit tricky to put in a distro, and you don't want to basically rip out the entire distro when you try to push your new software. So you try to do push by phases, like you push your new software, System D, but you don't make it default. Then you ask people, could you try to test it? And when you are satisfied with the feedback, you try to switch to it by automatically, so by default. Except that when you do your planning, you explain, we will go through 2 or 3 phases, so we will have a lot of feedback, a lot of help for people, and you get nothing. Basically, you do your planning, you send your planning to few mailing lists, you get flames in return, because you didn't discuss the planning before saying, okay, we are going to do that. And then people don't really talk about the planning itself, but what you are trying to do is pushing a new software, for instance, System D. But you get past through that, and then you try to go through the planning. Except that you were expecting other people to help you doing the integration, and that doesn't happen every time. When you do radical changes, don't expect a lot of people will come and help you. Some people will. A lot of people will wait. They'll wait until it's stable enough. Then you think, okay, it's stable enough. Let's switch it on by default. And then you get tons of new bugs, because people have a crazy way of configuring their crypt setup on top of LVM, on top of RAID, on top of whatever you want, and you didn't expect that. Or you discovered very strange features like, I don't know, configuring the tone of the beep at shutdown. Yes, you can do that on OpenSUSE. Well, no longer with System D. That's the kind of stuff you discover after the planning. But planning is essential, but don't expect to be just to follow it and it will go smoothly, because it won't. And maybe one of the mistakes I made when I did my initial planning announcement was I had already it in my head and I mailed it and got flames back. Instead, send it as a draft. It's stupid, but at least people will get the feeling that they can give feedback. And you probably get good feedback from that. Don't expect people to get something from you and say, okay, it's perfect. It won't be.
So next, what's nice to plan too is to have a fallback mode or to have some compatibility with what we had before. The reason for that is if we don't offer a smooth migration to users, they will always be unhappy about that. And having some fallback or having some really easy migration is a really easy answer to people who are complaining about. I can give some example for GNOME. Keep in mind that that's people will need we want that, but you have to warn them that it's really a temporary solution. The right path forward is what you are proposing. So, for instance, in GNOME, we had several things for that. Upstream, what we did is, for GNOME 3, we have a fallback mode where people don't have to use GNOME Shell. They use the same technologies as in GNOME 2. It's really looking similar. It's a bit different because we made some changes, but it's really the mainly same look and feel as GNOME 2. And a lot of people were actually happy to have that again. But we also were telling people, okay, if you don't like GNOME 3, that's fine. You can use XFCE, for instance. XFCE is great, we love it. And if you prefer that kind of desktop metaphor, you can use it. That's fine with us. And so some people migrated to XFCE, and that's cool. So that was really some easy answer for people who were like, oh shit, I don't like GNOME Shell, I don't like GNOME 3, I hate all of you. I will switch to another distribution that is not using GNOME 3, but all distributions are switching to GNOME 3, so that doesn't exist. But yeah, so that was really important in our case. Next, we have communication is key. So you have, that's really actually what Frederick was telling a few minutes ago. You communicate your plan, but you have to say it again and again. You have to put documents on the wiki. You have to make sure that people always have the answers. And so, yeah, I think we'll have some stuff to say about that in the case of KD4.
Yeah, so when communicating the KDE change, the dominant narrative looking back has become, oh, KDE promised too much and pushed out a very unfinished product. On the other hand, then upstream says, well, it's not our fault that the distributions adopted our stuff and pushed that out too much. And it really underlines how you can't communicate what you're doing concretely enough, and you really have to come out on every channel saying, this is what we're doing. And what we did, in fact, was we shipped KDE 3 for 2 releases after we started shipping KDE 4 stuff. So there was no forced migration. However, if you say, well, we're going to put the default for new users onto KDE 4, then people see that as being a forced migration. In retrospect, it would have been much simpler to say, we're introducing KDE 4, try it out, but here's your KDE 3 configuration. It's still there, you upgrade your machine, you keep all your KDE 3 packages. That's what was happening, but we never went out and said that. And as a result, some people lost a little bit of confidence in what we were doing. Some people went away. But have a plan a fallback, and then communicate that whole thing as a coherent story, so nobody really feels threatened or chased into a corner. People aren't going to like it anyway. They're going to complain about it. You have to filter that out. But if you can make sure that all of your answers are there, and or in the statements that you're making, in your milestone announcements that we do when we say we're releasing a milestone of OpenSUSE, or when you do your roadmap scheduling, all that information has to be there and it has to be clear. So you have to not just be your little developer working in your black, dark office. You also need to talk to your distributions, marketing teams, community managers, Twitter experts and people like that. What's up next?
It's a bit of a mess because we have actually the the slides with the notes on this screen and the PDF viewer on this screen because of my computer being broken. So apologies about that. In the planning, you also, we all know that we need a testing phase. We all know that we are all the best people in the world. We don't do mistakes and all that, but still there will be mistakes. And so it's really mandatory. We cannot escape that. And it's actually not only useful for us, but it's also useful for upstream, because we integrate what upstream is doing. And so we find issues that upstream never thought about. So we have issues like in the integration for our distribution, but also because of the interdependencies between the different components. So we have to plan for our testing phase. You have to think that it will be actually longer than what you expect. And so somebody has a nice story to say about that. Yeah, Frederick again.
Why me?
Well,
So-
actually, you talked about that a bit.
Yeah.
We discussed maybe for
And people never tested systemd before it's open source, as everybody knows. But yeah, I was saying just earlier that testing is really needed because you can't get all the people configuration on your own system. I said that I've discovered ways of configuring LVM, disk layout, in summary, disk layout, cryptography, in ways I couldn't imagine. And it was working. But it was working with script which was tested for years. And when you switch completely the way you handle mounting LVM RAID crypt setup, you test a little, then you push, so people test, and then they complain because, okay, they can't access their data. And then you have to extract from their Bugzilla report or report on mailing list. First, you need to ask them to fill bugs. It's maybe stupid for you, I'm not saying that for you, but it's really, really difficult to get feedback, unemotional feedback from people, because usually when something doesn't work, the first reaction, it doesn't work, it's shit, it's awful. Give me back my old way of booting my system, or give me back my old desktop. But you have to transform the feeling of people so that it's become useful feedback. Please fill a bug. And from that, you can really use the testing phase as a way of getting rid of all those strange setups. Not getting rid, but coping with them. Sometimes you will have to explain to people, sorry, this won't be possible in the future. Some people are okay with it, some people aren't. It's a bit difficult to handle, but it's needed. And this testing phase is really mandatory. Because if you switch directly from the I'm pushing some new stuff to automatic by default, then it's going to be horrible. First for your early tester, early users, and then for your entire users, and you get a lot of bad feedback, bad review.
So we have a lot of story about testing actually, but we don't have that much time to tell them. You can do planning. You can do a lot of planning. You can think that, okay, I've done my planning really right. So I have a good plan. I have really the right steps. I know that I have this time, and this time for testing, for developing, and all that. But you will always hit technical issues. And actually, the first one is actually you broke my package. So you do your stuff, and then you upload that to the main repository, and you broke the package of other people. that could have happened for a lot of reasons. That could be because there's a new, the API or ABI changed, simply. That could be, so for instance, in GNOME 3, obviously we switched to GK3, and we had stuff like Nautilus, which has extensions, but the new extensions had to be developed with GK3 too. And it happens that the old extensions were not working anymore. So we broke a lot of stuff this way, and there was actually an interesting blog post about how Debian integrated GNOME 3, and they were talking about that kind of stuff. So that could be API, ABI, that could be also just the dbus API and all that. So just to move on, yeah. So more, an interesting story about that is in OpenSUSE, when we switched to GNOME 3, we needed the new network manager. So the new network manager, it was 09, I think, yeah, and we had 08. And network manager is all fine. It has some libraries, but the libraries are mostly used by GNOME. But it also exposes a dbus service, which is actually some kind of API, but you only see the issues at runtime. And it turns out that if you change network manager for GNOME, you break KDE, you know. And that's really cool because when we test GNOME, we don't test KDE, so we don't know about that kind of stuff. So that's the kind of lessons we learned with experience. When there's a new network manager version, we actually, before pushing it, we go to the KDE people, hey Will, did you try it? You know, is it working for you? And so we have that kind of stuff. And so we're eating always that kind of issues where we break package from other people. And you can plan as much as you want, but it will happen. And the best you can do is being reactive and telling people, okay, I'm pushing this new library, the API has changed. If this breaks your package, it's likely that you have to do that or that or that. And send this mail, and that's all you can do, really. And help people fix the build issues.
On the topic of it's bigger than you think, Okay, I'll start about my bit about big what you think. When we introduced KDE4, we suddenly became aware that OpenSUSE had been carrying a supremely large amount of patches against KDE3 that we'd been doing for like over 5 years. Some of the things had been, customizations had been developed over years and years and years. And the adaptation of those adaptations, it was actually one of the major costs that we had to face. Things were written years ago to meet some specific business need, or the developer left, or they were never merged upstream, and yet people depend upon those things. So look at the amount of patches you're carrying, look at the amount of customized configuration, and ask yourself, will I be able to carry those forward into the new system? And if not, have a good long think and think, is this the right time to push this upstream? It might be a advantage for you personally, but it's also a cost, and you have to like always weigh up whether that cost is worth the advantage that it buys you. And if not, push it upstream, or if necessary, drop it, forget about it, and expect that a few people will complain if they were using that feature. For me, the example for that was people really loved having an arrow on either side of the panel that you can click that makes the panel go whoosh under the off the side of the screen. We have also hide now. You know, you can move the mouse off the panel and it disappears. Having that extra button that takes up 120 pixels is just really a waste of screen space. But people are going to deal with it, so people are going to need it or think they need it. So again, it comes back to communication and really presenting those alternatives as clearly and as rationally in the face of aggrieved flaming as you can.
So another thing related to the package is trying to speed a little, but just to make sure that I don't forget anything. When you have a lot of dependencies, when you want to push something radical, usually it's not just one package. It's 2, 3, 5. That's, let's say, for systemd, it's easy. For GNOME or KDE, it's a little more than 20, 30. For GNOME, it's 200. Let's say 200. Just a little more than 20. And this is the kind of stuff you can't push one after another because you have a lot of crazy dependencies. We already talked about, for instance, network manager, but you can have something which depends on something else, which depends on something else, and if you have the unfortunate luck of pushing a new version before something else in your main repository, you can basically either crash everything or break anything. Nothing will be able to build anymore. So we use something which is really useful for OpenSUSE is OBS, to be able to work on separate repositories, separate projects, so we can build everything against development distribution. And this way we contain what we know that we are going to push in the future or in the near future. And we can still work. People using the development distro can still work without all the changes we need to push. And then we can try to push them in the right order, which is not always easy due to several stuff like, I don't know, legal review and crazy stuff.
Yeah, so for instance, in OpenSUSE, when we push a package to what we call factory, which is the development version of OpenSUSE, we have a legal review, we have the package review, which is how packaging is done, and we also have, for new package, we have the security review. And so when you switch to a new version, like for GNOME or for KDE, it can come with new dependencies like udisk or upower, or that kind of stuff, which needs to be reviewed by the security team because it's really installing new services which are system-wide, running as root and all that. So it's really, they have to be careful about that. But we also have the legal review to make sure that all the licensing is good. And so sometimes you push a package, you push all of GNOME, and you know it's working fine altogether, but except that this tiny component gets rejected because the license is wrong. And so you actually, everything else gets in, so you break everything this way. And okay, that can happen. So actually what you should do in that case, I don't know if it's the same for all the distributions, but in OpenSUSE we have that steps really. What we are trying to do is to warn the legal team, to warn the security team that those new packages are coming soon, they should review them as soon as possible. Yeah, skip that. We're just moving on. We've said about several of that. Social issues, that's an interesting part.
So everyone has a kind of a comfort zone, the software they're used to using. And the unfortunate consequence of change is that it walks all over that comfort zone and upsets people. Generally, your user base out there hates change. In their world, the software stays exactly as they like it, and only the bugs get fixed. However, change is essential. It's like ploughing a field. It lets air into the project. It attracts new developers. It finds new problems to be solved. They attract new developers, and it keeps the whole project living and moving. So your challenge as any kind of a responsible engineer is to interface the needs of a living development engineering project versus balance the needs of the user. This can be really hard to achieve. And my way of approaching this is to gradually discuss all the new features that are going to come in, so people see that things are going to change gradually. They don't suddenly become overwhelmed with, oh, you're going to just take everything away from you and replace it. The fallback mode helps that. And just have that message, make sure it's really clear, have it in your wikis. When people complain, you can just point to that rather than spending another half an hour writing that same email to explain the change. Keep it efficient. And don't let yourselves get kind of sidetracked by some very loud people who demand all their attention and say, look, I have this really important corner case like the panel hide button. Be polite, but move on and keep moving because your resources are limited. There's always going to be a vocal minority of people who complain about stuff. The thing to keep in mind is that happy people are probably just getting on with it and it works, whereas the one unhappy guy is making more noise than 100 happy people. You're probably, even if there is that noise there, you're probably doing things right. If you don't have your communications down, though, this vocal minority can turn really toxic, though, because they can create the whole story of this change process. They actually create, in the absence of the facts, they'll create some conspiracy that you're rewriting the world to just because that's your personal thing, you've got some agenda, you want to drive away everyone's users from GNOME to XFCE, or you only care about mobile devices and traditional desktop users are completely indifferent to you. And this vocal minority, if you're not on the ball of addressing your community's needs and fears, can become the dominant discussion around the project. And once that gets traction, it's really hard to fix that. So stay on the ball. Next slide is how to compromise.
Sorry. So when we do wide impact change, they actually it's a big push. We have to do a lot of changes, and so people are unhappy about that. We have the vocal minority and all that, but it's actually you can help people accept what you are doing by accepting compromises. Of course, you're doing the big change. You're pushing for the big change. But some tiny minor detail that you might be willing to accept, to change, might make some people happy and might really just convert them to what you're trying to do. For instance, in GNOME 3, if you know how it looks like, so you have a menu on the top right where you access all the settings from your computer, and by default there's only suspend. You cannot shut down your computer, you have to press Alt to shut down your computer. So it's by design, it was decided this way upstream. But it turns out that in OpenSUSE a lot of people were complaining about that. And so somebody just said, okay, I like GNOME 3, but this tiny detail is really annoying to me. And so what he pushed, just before the release of OpenSUSE 12.1, he said, okay, I think we should really change that. We should ship this extension by default, which always display the shutdown menu item. And so in like 2 days, he did the suggestion and implemented that. And this guy was actually not participating actively to GNOME 3 switch, but he did that. And by just doing this small change, which was not going against the move to GNOME 3, it actually helped people accept the change that we were doing in OpenSUSE for that. So those tiny details that we should be ready to accept, we should not fight over those all the time. So that makes a lot of difference for people, just showing that you are open. So how much time do we have left? 10 minutes. Okay, so what we wanted to have is to keep the last 10-15 minutes for you for questions, but also we want to hear your experience in your distribution, what you have done, like big change. I know that there is a blog post about how GNOME 3 was integrated in Debian, which was quite interesting to read. If you want, I can show you the URL later on, I guess, except that it's on my computer. But but what is your experience in your distribution? Is there any story in Debian, Fedora, Gentoo, or whatever that you would like to share? Or if you have any question. Emmanuel.
Okay. My name is Emmanuel Simon. I'm a member of the POSIG, Fedora POSIG. So we maintain Perl and we maintain nearly 2,000 modules and 1,800. And when you upgrade Perl, so you switch from 5.12 to 5.14, you need to rebuild every single Perl module so that it ends up in a path that Perl 5.14 looks for. Typically what we've always done until now is that we make a branch in the repo, build Perl 5.14, build the 1,800 modules, and then merge it back into Rawhide, the equivalent of a factory in OpenSUSE. At which point people get 1,800 new packages sucking up their bandwidth. And we've always, next time we wonder if we're not going to do this in Rawhide directly. Build Perl 5.16, push it, break everything that's Perl related, and then build all the Perl modules directly in Rawhide to avoid the branch then merge again scenario.
This is something that we've actually gone the other direction. We've tried to stagger those check-ins because if you can get it right the first time, I'm absolutely I just don't believe that you can do it. And I think that at some point you're going to change something in libperl or in one of those like packages towards the root of the tree, and those 1,800 packages aren't going to get rebuilt and pushed out in Rawhide once, rather 5 times, and then you're upsetting your Rawhide users again with a lot of churn and a lot of rebuilds before things that depend on that, and then everything else that depends on Perl in Rawhide probably is going to rebuild as well. You're going to slow yourselves down. The problem that it comes down to, that what you described, is that this big push is problematic for some users. And my experience of that problem has been, as I've been traveling outside of the US and Europe into countries which have less bandwidth, you have a lot of very keen contributors who want to contribute, but they can't be doing a 1.5 gig download every week to get the latest snapshot. And my answer to that is, for those contributors, try and get them to act in a local area, in a small area. Maybe it's the education project within the distribution, where they can be active and they can see their changes go back upstream within the distribution to the main distribution, but they don't have to be exposed to that whirlpool of change, of bandwidth consuming change now that is happening in the main distribution branch. If anyone's got a better solution to that, I'd like to hear it. Any more questions, any more observations on what we've been talking about? So what I'd like to throw a question open to the audience. Where do you think the next big curveball that's going to upset the Linux distributions is going to come from? what's going to come in out there, and everything's going to have to be rebuilt, everything's going to change the way it works? Is it the move away from just building for Intel architectures? Is that going to change things? Does anyone see anything coming around the corner? Is anyone working on something that's going to upset things like this? The question was, what about Python 3? Do you guys have any insight into what Python 3 might do to us? I know it'll probably upset the cube bindings, but...
So I actually don't know the details, but I expect that all distributions will keep Python 2 for a long time, because the Python 2 modules are not compatible with Python 3, so you have to port them, and this is going to take a long time. But I don't really follow Python development, but I believe that the Python community is well aware of that, and they're actually happy with that. It's parallel installable, and that's all fine for them.
That brings me back to the KDE transition. When you do have an upstream community that it's like, really is like, we really want to see our stuff out there, and we don't want to see you packaging the old stuff, then you have to really tread with caution. Because that can, it can jeopardize you providing a fallback to give that kind of sanctuary comfort zone to users. And what's also worse, it can really split your energies. You can end up maintaining 2 forks of your code base, or 2 versions of your code base for quite a long time in distribution terms, and that takes a lot of time and work. So you have to be aware of the cost of that. But if you can do it, minimize the disruption while still making progress forwards and getting the new software out there. Because frankly, why do people install your next version of distribution? It's because they want to see the version numbers go up and they want to see the cool new stuff. Question at the back from Adrian.
Just one remark, which is Python 2.3 migration or also systemd is, and you keep people in mind that provide or maintain code which is not targeting only a single distribution, but many of them, and they can usually only start when the last distribution has migrated. So for instance, with Python 2, I need to maintain my Python code until Python 3 is available on the oldest distribution I maintain. Then I can start at all with my migration. And that's similar for the systemd. I need to, before I can really switch to systemd with service files, I need to wait when says 10 and says 11 is outpaged, so it takes 10 years. That's really something which is hard to understand from the upstream developer. I can understand this, but it's a big deal.
Just to summarize Adrian's point there for the people on the video, he's saying that a downstream consumer of software that changes, which is used on many different distributions, for example Python, has to wait until all the distributions shipping the new version before it makes sense for him to port his scripts, his code, his apps to that new version. And so it's very important for us, the distribution, to consider the pace at which things change. Otherwise, there's no incentive for a service author to start shipping systemd modules if they don't exist on all distributions yet, if systemd isn't there yet. Is that accurate, Adrian? Well, okay, that's our time is up. If you have any questions or you just want to blame us and tell us how good you, will be here at the front for a couple of minutes. Otherwise, thanks for coming.